Hey everyone, I hope that you are all having a good weekend and that you are getting some good stuff done and getting a chance to relax. Um, this video is to kind of run through some of the things that we missed on Thursday, though some of them will have come to you through the comments that you received on Canvas. So um, please, if you haven't gotten the chance to look at your feedback on your A1 prep tools, I provided additional comments in order to kind of ensure that you maybe got some of the material that you would have gotten on Thursday. And then the other two things that I want to cover today or in this video are like to look at a strong example and point out the genre conventions that you'll want to be paying attention to as you transfer your A1 prep tool into your initial draft. And I'd also like to go through the rubric just so we can kind of see the way in which the skills that we've been talking about for the last few weeks are tied to how this assignment is going to be graded. Before we do any of that, I am going to quickly run through what it is you're responsible for Tuesday. So these instructions have been up for a while. The first thing is to make sure you view this video. So if you are listening to this and you are checking that off the list, also make sure you read the following two readings. And we're going to be writing about both of these in class. So make sure you've read, you've annotated Responding to Other Students' Writing by Richard Straub and Shitty First Drafts by Anne Lamott. And those are both going to be in your Healthy State Reader. Also have access to a sample paper for Tuesday's class, and it's not the strong one, it's the mid one. And if you go back to this module, you should see it linked. It's also linked in the homework instructions. And then I am pushing your peer review rough draft to Tuesday at midnight because I want to give you a little bit more time if you want to come by office hours on Tuesday or if you want to ask questions in class. And we'll talk on Tuesday about how the remainder of peer review is going to run. So just kind of get a good start on that. All right, so that is what you have to do for Tuesday. All right, so let's start here with our strong example. And the first thing that I will say is that even though it is a strong example, it's not a perfect example, right? So it is a student example. There might be some smaller issues with it, but in general, this paper does all the things that check the boxes in order to receive a high grade on this assignment. So to start us off, we have the author is introducing the text and they introduce the publication place. With the TED Talk, it's a little bit different. But generally, I'm not looking for, I think some of you were thinking a location like a city. I'm just looking for the title of the publication that the article is published in, and that should be in your Healthy State Reader right above the article. So just make sure that's there in italics and make sure that you have the title. You also want to make sure the date is there, so this isn't something that is in here, as well as the author's first and last names. So yeah. So the other thing you'll notice here is that rather than kind of talk generally about the article or about the TED Talk, the student author just goes right into telling the reader what the thesis is. And because the summary is meant to be concise, that's exactly what you want to do, right? You don't want to spend a whole lot of time giving context. You're really just trying to show your reader, your audience, the structure of the argument, right? So rather than saying that, the article is about this and this and this, and then getting to the thesis, going right into the thesis with, what the author argued. And a lot of you will notice that I made comments on the thesis, just kind of pushing you all to get a little bit more specific about what it is that the author is trying to say. Again, as authors, we often think that our reader knows exactly what we're saying, but oftentimes that's not the case, and our audience, we have to remember, has not read this text. after the author states a clear thesis, they can go right into the first supporting idea, right? So really just stating that and showing the transition, and there's a transition here, right, that shows that this point supports this idea, right? So thinking about the kinds of transitions that you can use in order to help your reader see how these ideas are connected, right? So a part of this assignment is identifying those bigger picture ideas, but part of it is also showing your reader how these ideas are then connected, right? So in the talk, Cain supports this point by explaining that currently, due to an intense focus on collaboration, the education and workplace model is designed for extroverts, right? So this is a reason. And then from here, and this isn't something that you necessarily have to do, but it might work to develop some of your points and help you explain them. This author is providing a piece of evidence in order to really explain this reason. So she specifically, Cain, cites an example of open plan offices without walls where we are subject to the constant noise and gaze of our coworkers, right? So I have these transitions in between my sentences, which really shows my reader how these different ideas relate. And then we have a quick connection back to the claim. Again, not always necessary, but it really does help develop the point and help your reader see how everything ties back to the author's thesis. Additionally, she explains that introverts are often less likely to be chosen for leadership positions. Cain finds this problematic, right? So there's the connection back to the thesis, and reports that workplaces actually benefit from an equal balance of introverts and extroverts, right? Then she moves into the second larger key point here, providing some examples, and ends on a note of tying everything back to that thesis, right? Ultimately, Cain argues that due to the important benefits that introverts offer, educational and workplace settings should cater to a better balance of personality types, right? So your summary is really just a reporting of those ideas and showing how the ideas are related. As a reminder, you do want to make sure that you are not bringing your own ideas into the text until you move into your response, and that you are citing everything, right? So everything needs to have some sort of author tag tied to it. Cain finds. Additionally, she explains. Finally, Cain relays. Ultimately, Cain argues, right? Every idea is shown here to be a reflection of the author's idea. So once you have summarized, you've really contextualized this response that you're going to write for your reader, because now your reader has a sense of the argument being made. And then your next step is to move into your response. So I know this seems like a kind of funky little paragraph here, and honestly, this could be its own thing. This could also be a part of the introduction, but some students like to separate it just to show that difference. But this is where you're going to state your general reaction to the text, right? And this is something that you should have seen in my comments. Some of you kind of at the end wanted to return to the author's thesis, but at this point we're done with that and we're moving into your thesis, right? And your thesis is, this is generally how I felt about these ideas, right? And then as you move into the body of your paper, you're going to talk about those specific ideas more in depth. So here we're switching over to a different kind of voice where we're using first person and talking about our own response. So Cain's points resonated with me on many levels, and I agree with many of the points that she makes. Specifically, I appreciate her observations about the extroverted nature of our school system as it reflects my own experience in school. Additionally, I agree with her concerns that continual collaboration can lead to a skewed perception of our beliefs. So one thing to kind of be aware of here is you don't necessarily have to agree with the author completely. The A1 prep tool will give you some different ways you might respond, but just because the example is doing it, don't feel like you have to be in agreement with everything. So here is where you would kind of state your general ideas about the text, again, your thesis, before moving into talking about the more specific points. So I had you on your A1 prep tool start with a quote. But before you move into that quote, you're going to want to offer a little bit of context, right? So having a really clear topic sentence so that you're letting your reader know what it is you're doing is going to be super important. So rather than going right to that quote, the author starts by kind of moving into a transition, right? Where she's transitioning into the idea by paraphrasing it first. One point that Cain made me consider is the idea that school systems need to change in order to teach young people that being an introvert is okay and that introverted people still bring something to the table. She illustrates how school systems are pushing kids to be more extroverted than introverted, right? So I've really clarified that point and what I'm going to respond to, and then I'm providing a quote to back up those ideas. In her TED Talk, she states our most important institutions are designed mostly for extroverts, and for extroverts need for lots of stimulation. So I have this quote, right? But rather than jumping right to my response, I take a little bit of time to first of all give my reader a sense of what is happening here, right? So she uses this point to show that the school environment needs to change. I've kind of translated that quote for my reader. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about my own response. So the author is going to talk about their own response. This is something that I hadn't really thought about before, but it makes a lot of sense to me now. Okay, so my response is clear. After clarifying that response, that's when you can kind of move into your own experience. So your reader knows, before you move into your own experience, your reader has a really clear sense of the idea that you are responding to, a sense of what that idea, what the author was doing with that idea, and a sense of how you've responded. So now all you need to do in this next section is talk about your own experience and how it might have shaped that response. And this is something that I think some of you could go a little bit further to develop. So for instance, been ignoring updates. For instance, some of you I think might feel like, well, I don't have direct experience with that. And that's okay. You don't need direct experience in order to have some sort of opinion on a topic. Obviously, people who have direct experience, their opinion might hold a little bit more weight, but that doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. And usually your opinion comes from somewhere. So maybe just thinking about what you've observed in your life, what you've watched, what you have, interacted with, and trying to focus on one of those experiences to help you, to help explain your perspective, right? So, I'm not going to read through all of this, but this is where the reader is really, or the author is really taking the time to talk through their own experience. And then they end with just a quick follow-up, where they're tying it back to Cain's idea, right? And then ultimately at the very end, so they do this a couple times with two different ideas. At the very end, we're doing a final connection back to our own general thesis, which is, in general, I responded positively to this article. And again, yours might be more nuanced. So that is the structure that that I think is going to help in terms of the organization of ideas. And one thing that you are going to want to be aware of is that the structure of the response paragraph is different than the structure of the summary, because with a summary, you are kind of moving rather quickly from one idea to the next and trying to kind of show the relationship between these ideas. But then when you get to the response, you're talking about the idea and really developing your thoughts on that idea. So we're gonna, in the next video, because I can only do 15-minute increments, we're gonna talk a bit more about the rubric as well as this organizational structure.